When you picture World War II, you probably think of pretty clear battle lines, right? Allies versus Axis. But in China, oh man, it was a whole different story. It was so much more complicated. Today, we're going to dive into the absolutely unique and intense situation of a nation fighting a war inside of another war.
So let's just jump right into the core problem with this question. I mean, seriously, think about it. How do you possibly fight off a massive foreign army when your country is already tearing itself apart in a civil war? This was the impossible reality for China, and it shapes everything we're about to talk about.
All right, so to really get a handle on what was happening in China during World War II, we actually have to rewind the clock a bit, because long before the rest of the world was at war, China was already at war with itself.
And this is the absolute key to understanding everything. For a full 10 years before Japan's major invasion, China was already in the middle of a brutal, soul-crushing civil war. This wasn't some minor disagreement. It was a fight to the death for the future of the nation. So you had two sides. On one hand, you've got the official nationalist government, the one recognized by other countries. And on the other hand, you had these powerful and really fast-growing communist rebels who were challenging the government for control of, well, everything. These two were locked in this epic struggle for power.
And then, just like that, the whole game changes. A new enemy shows up on the scene, a powerful, external one. And this invasion forces these two bitter enemies to confront a threat that could wipe them both out.
This is what we call the Second Sino-Japanese War. And what's so fascinating is the effect it had on that civil war. It didn't end it, not at all. Instead, it forced this really awkward temporary truce. It's like they both agreed to point their guns at the Japanese for a while instead of each other. At least, that was the idea.
And this quote right here, it just hits the nail on the head. Even with a common enemy, the distrust between the nationalists and the communists ran so deep, it became this critical weakness. They could never fully work together because each side was always thinking ahead, trying to save its strength for the day they knew the Civil War would start up again.
So let's take a look at the leaders trying to navigate this insane situation. We'll start with the guy in charge of the official government, who was basically stuck fighting a war on two fronts at the same time.
At the top of that government was the Generalissimo himself, Chiang Kai-shek. As the recognized leader of China, the massive weight of defending the entire nation fell right on his shoulders.
Okay, so let's break down his position. He's the official head of state, the military dictator. So his approach is what you'd expect. Mobilize the national army, try to get international help, especially from the United States. But here's the catch, his big dilemma. Every single soldier, every rifle he uses to fight Japan is one he can't use to finally crush his rivals, the communists.
Now let's switch gears and look at the other major player in this whole drama, the leader of the rebellion. For him, the war against Japan was, both a crisis for the nation and a huge strategic opportunity.
And that leader on the other side of the chessboard was Mao Zedong. He wasn't trying to defend an existing government. He was trying to build a new one from the ground up.
Mao's situation? Totally different. As a rebel leader, he didn't have to worry about defending the whole country with big armies. Instead, he could use things like guerrilla tactics against the Japanese. This let him save his main fighting force while winning over people in the countryside, all while getting ready for the day the Civil War would inevitably kick off again.
So what happens when the common enemy is finally gone? When Japan is defeated? Did China finally get peace? Well, the answer to that is the final, and maybe most dramatic, part of this whole story.
This timeline just lays it all out so clearly. You've got the Civil War raging for a decade. Then, boom, 1937, Japan's invasion basically hits a giant pause button. But look what happens the instant World War II ends in 1945. The pause is over. The Civil War is back on, just like that. But calling it a pause is maybe a little bit misleading, because for 8 long years, things weren't just frozen. The nationalists, they took the brunt of the heavy fighting against Japan. It just drained their resources, their soldiers, everything.
And at the same time, what were Mao's communists doing? Well, they were using those guerrilla tactics to save their strength and actually expand their influence in the countryside. So this so-called pause was really a time of major strategic repositioning. The whole balance of power was shifting right under everyone's noses.
And that is the great, tragic irony of it all. For China, beating Japan wasn't the end of the war. No way. It was just the starting gun for the main event to begin all over again, only this time the two sides were in totally different shape than when they started.
Which leaves us with this final, really big question to chew on. Sure, Japan's invasion completely changed the course of events, but when all was said and done, who was the more decisive force in shaping modern China? Was it the foreign power that forced them to stop fighting each other for a bit? Or was it the two internal rivals who were just determined to destroy one another no matter what? It's a question that really gets to the heart of this war within a war. Thanks for joining me.